Welcome to Seekers to Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we dive deep into the habits, mindsets, and strategies that set top financial advisors apart. I'm Scott Tatum, and today I'll be talking with Ken to explore his thoughts on what makes having pricing conversations with prospects and clients so incredibly difficult for financial advisors. Ken, let's get our listeners into the right frame of mind. We can't delve deeply into the psyche of clients while dwelling in our busy world. So let's leave that outside world behind for 25 minutes and look deep inside human behavior to explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide. And today, Ken, we are not talking about the psyche of clients. We are talking about the psyche of our advisor listeners. And this is a topic I asked for because I have been working with the great work you've done on the masterclass on pricing and repricing. And as I'm reflecting on how audiences are receiving this information, I said, I need some Ken time. And I thought, as a matter of fact, so do all of our listeners need some Ken time. So here's the setup. There are three elements to this. There is first the analytics, the benchmarking. All of the firms are doing great work on here's where the industry's setting the prices, here's where you're doing it, here's some outliers. Same thing with current clients. You have done some wonderful work on, okay, once you see a gap, here's what you can actually say. But I think there's a third element, and that's what I hope we can really address today. Knowing that you've got a mispricing situation with prospects is one thing. Knowing what to do about it is a second thing, and is a gap you walked into. Understanding what's at risk for the client is the third thing, and that's where I need the Ken time. So let's start with prospecting. What is going on in the client system 1 and system 2 brain when they are going through this courtship phase with a prospect?
Well, Scott, you mentioned something in your setup to this podcast that I think sums up what this conversation needs to be about. You talked about the dynamics of the prospective client or the existing client, and you say those are things that we know how to manage. We know how to have conversations. We know how to prospect. And then there's the whole issue of setting the price for that. That's all the psyche of the client. And, we spend most of our time at the Advisor Institute helping advisors understand client behavior. We would be making a mistake if we did that here when it comes to pricing, because it's not client behavior that is causing the problem. So let's look at what is the problem. And the problem is wholly in the thinking patterns and the reactivity of advisors. Now, part of that problem is advisors aren't aware of that their belief is that they see reality accurately and the price they set is a necessary expression of accurately perceiving what the client needs. And so for the advisor who has come to that conclusion, the fact that their practice is priced 10 or 15 or 20% below their competitors or their colleagues they conclude that, well, that's an artifact of the type of client I work with or my geography or some function of their business that requires this of them, that they must provide a discount, that they can't reprice underpriced clients in their practice. It's a belief, but it has no bearing in reality. And why do I say that? Well, it's where the analytics comes in. And unfortunately, analytics never change beliefs. You can show a person facts all day long and they won't change their beliefs. And we know that from virtually every other conversation we have, politics, religion, etc., all this stuff of life. We believe what we believe. The facts aren't going to change our mind. But if you look at the facts, and I'm thinking specifically of this lovely chart that Price Metrics publishes every year, the distribution of pricing across years of service, geography, type of client is totally a scatter plot. There's no pattern whatsoever. If clients were influencing pricing, there would be a pattern. That what would be emerging is the client psyche about pricing. There is none. We have advisors charging super premium fees. We have advisors charging super discounted fees, and there's no rationale to it whatsoever, except that the advisor has discretion to a great extent about how much they charge. And that discretion then means the advisor has to come to this conclusion. So the analytics reveal that this is an advisor problem, not a client problem. And that's the first thing that the advisor listening to me has to understand. Whatever price you're charging is a function of your belief, not a function of reality. And if you can accept that and you can question your own conclusions and say, okay, what if I'm wrong? What if this knee-jerk reaction to discounting is my thing and is a part of my process and is something that is operating without my permission or even my involvement? That would be an incredibly powerful conclusion to come to. So what I think we have to do is accept that because the advisor has discretion, because they're put in this incredible cauldron of anxiety when they're facing the prospect and have to price, or they're talking to the client who's underpriced and is asking for more and more for which they are not paying, that moment of conversation is a tremendously fraught moment, but not because of the client, because of the advisor's belief system.
So unpack that a little bit for me. When you think about a prospecting situation where the advisor has a history of hearing yes, when we talk to successful advisors and we say, hey, what's your close percentage? They are very, very confident, and I think probably rightfully so. And we say, yeah, but you're discounting your prices. You can change this behavior and you can get a full price. What's at stake in that change of behavior when they've got decades of experience going, yeah, but I'm hearing yes all the time?
Well, they have decades of experience, and in the early stages of those decades of experience, they were in a different marketplace where there was, if you go back into the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, the response potential amongst clients was higher, and this whole idea of we close virtually 100% of the people we talk to was a badge of honor, was a badge of success. I would suggest first and foremost that if an advisor has a 100% close rate, then you are operating in an artifact where you are giving yourself to clients and you're not establishing yourself as a premium offer. Not every client wants premium services. Not every client is willing to pay for premium services. So if you're closing 100%, you're clearly underpricing by a fair margin. I would suggest that a successful close rate would be closer to 80%, and that you will have from time to time clients who say, yeah, I want a different price from that. And their desire to drive the boat and to make the decisions reveals that they're not a good client for your practice. They're not going to attend to your guidance. They don't elevate you in terms of a character of great significance. They are not seeing you as a trusted advisor across a range of holistic issues in their life. If the client sees you in that light, and it's important for you to be able to express that, teach them, help them understand, hey, you may have talked to other advisor, you've never talked to somebody like me before. That will result in about 20% of your clients being unable to acknowledge that, and that would be a good thing. Why? Because if you can grapple with the pricing issue inside yourself and accept 80% is the success rate, that in fact, if I get any higher than 80%, I'm giving something up. I am operating not in my best interest or in the client's best interest. So that indicator is an issue. But Scott, what's going on in that process, if you give up that indicator and say, okay, I'll accept 80%, you're still going to have a problem. And the problem is going to be loss aversion. Loss aversion is a fascinating heuristic. It was one of the first heuristics that Tversky and Kahneman were able to articulate. It's a key part of their prospect theory process. If you look at Kahneman's writings, especially his big book, Thinking Fast and Slow, loss aversion is a huge part of his exciting and excited perception of what he was discovering about human beings that was so powerful. And that is that human beings are not rational in their decision making, that the experience of losses creates a powerful negative response that's out of sync to the actual experience of loss. And you can try to parse that in different ways you want, but what we know is that a negative experience or a loss experience is about 2.5 times more stimulating to the negative than the equivalent of positive. So if I win $10 in blackjack, I feel good. If I lose $10 in blackjack, I feel 2.5 times worse in the negative. There's a great consultant out there now who's teaching negotiating skills. His name is Chris Voss, and he's written a book. It's a great book, by the way, and I commend it. It's Never Split the Difference, but it's all about negotiating. And one of the interesting things he says, very much a student of behavioral economics, he says the reason he doesn't recommend compromising in negotiations is that when someone compromises, that is to say they give up something to get something, loss aversion makes that a negative experience. So I'm going to give up a little bit to get a little bit. Well, the getting that I get is that 1 unit of positive. The giving up is 2.5 to the negative. He says, so compromises always result in two human beings feeling bad about the deal. That's how powerful loss aversion is. Okay, well, what does that have to do with setting price? You're talking to a prospect. What do you mean loss aversion? No. When you're setting price, and I don't care where it is in the process, our model would suggest setting price after several meetings in which you're curating experiences that are affecting the client to the positive, and the client's having this experience of, wow, I've never had this kind of conversation before. I've never felt this deeply understood. I've never had this wide a range of issues presented to me. Wow, this is different, to the better, to the positive. And so at the end of that process, after several meetings, several series of experiences, and you say, well, here's my price, it's a premium level price. The client's like, well, of course it is, right? However, most advisors listening to me don't practice that way. I certainly run into a lot of advisors who kind of discovered the value of a multi-meeting discovery process, but a lot of folks want to try to get it done in the first meeting or maybe the second meeting. So you have a first kind of preliminary feeler meeting, and then you have the second meeting, and they want to get this thing done and closed right away. Well, here's the problem for the advisor, right? So they've been prospecting, they've been doing a lot of things, so they've been mindfully out there and spending time at it, and then they have this opportunity, right? So that finally pays off in some way. So they've been spending a lot of time in these actions, and now they encounter this human. Well, that first encounter is not a closing opportunity, it's an opening moment. So there's this opening moment. Well, then immediately, what does the advisor do? They've started now a meaningful conversation. It might close, it might not, but they've started a meaningful conversation. And that other person starts to become real to them. That other person starts to talk to them a little bit about their situation. The advisor tells them a little bit about what they do. The advisor very quickly is making an assessment. If this person became part of my practice, what would that mean to me? Well, obviously, they kind of do some discovery, and the person says, well, ever since the felony, I haven't had much money. I have $75,000. That seems like a lot. And the advisor's like, yeah, you wouldn't mean anything to me in my practice. And they will discontinue the conversation. They make a future picture of result. But 99 times out of 100, that's not what's happening. Advisors are really good about being in the right place or the right type of person. And they start talking to somebody who's got $5 million. That $5 million, even if you have $300 million under management, a $5 million client is still a meaningful client. It's still meaningful return. And so they assess this client and say, oh, what would it look like if they were part of my practice? They do that as soon as the conversation becomes real. They haven't even started discovery yet, but they start having this imagination of that person working with them, and they start feeling the positive rush that they are going to feel when that client says yes. And that goes into now, okay, they have this preliminary conversation, and now they have this first formal conversation, and that gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and they're more and more excited about what this could look like. And now they get into the actual meeting where they're going to try to close the deal. It's early. In our opinion, would be early. They really should take some more time, more experiences, really establish the difference of the experience. But the advisor's in a hurry. The advisors are eager. And now it gets to the point where they're approaching where they're going to set the price. And as they do that, and they realize that price is going to be a key issue for the client to make a decision. And they know they haven't done a lot to give the client an experience of how unique they are, but it's gone really well. And so they've been imagining now for a couple of weeks this client in their practice. Those dollars almost are feeling booked. And now it comes the time for the price, and they start to imagine the client saying no. And that is an experience of loss aversion. So they're looking at that saying, oh, I don't want this client to say no. And so they know rationally they want to charge, let's say, what's a premium fee? They want to charge 1.25. And we have hundreds of advisors that are doing that. They're charging a premium fee to clients like this. And the clients are not just happy, they're delighted to pay for the services and experience they're having with this advisor. But this advisor is looking at this and saying, okay, and they're saying, I really should charge my premium fee. But every cell in their body is feeling the loss aversion on the counter side of, well, what if they say no? That'll feel awful. So I trade my price premium for a discount to avoid that negative feeling. And all of that happens inside the mind of the advisor with nothing coming to them from the client indicating that. By the way, even if they offer that premium fee as the fee, and the client says, is that the best you can do? And the advisor feels like the client is asking for a discount. The client's not. The client's testing. The client doesn't know if that's just the first part of a negotiation. And so, like anyone who's buying intangibles, they're going to say, well, is there any possibility of a lesser price? You know, you hire a painter and they say it's 30 grand for the deal. Well, is that the best you can do? Well, I can shave 20%. This happens all the time. But by the way, I would have paid the 30 if you told me there was no option, right? So here's the issue. It is about the loss aversion in the client. By the way, that is rooted so deeply that you see it in every interaction with the advisor going into that process. And it doesn't matter how positive and euphoric the prospecting part is.
Well, Ken, that's just such great insight because seeing that it works that way is really insightful. Understanding that loss aversion starts so early in the process that the advisor starts talking to a prospect and starts imagining the high of hearing yes. And so they see pricing as a threat to the yes, and they see change of behavior around pricing as a threat to the yes. And so it's really an issue of loss aversion, and getting over that hurdle is complicated. So if that's the challenge with prospecting, is there any distinction with repricing with the current client, or are we still really dealing with some version of the same thing?
Well, it is the same thing because what has happened in the prospecting is the advisor begins coding in their experience this human being they're prospecting as being part of their practice. So when it comes to setting the price, even though they haven't started working with them, it still feels like a loss of a client, a loss of that 5 million. Now, you go out into your practice and you have a half a dozen clients that you brought in years ago that are priced way below where they should be. For whatever reason that happened, you had discretion, you made the decision, You were younger in your practice. You were much more desperate for clients at that point. It's all understandable. I mean, the the biggest reason this problem exists is we give advisors discretion instead of requiring advisors to operate according to a set fee schedule that works for everybody. It works for the firm, it works for the advisor, and it works for the client. That's how most industries operate. Here we put all the burden of this on the advisor, and so the advisor's psyche is really what creates the problem. With existing clients, it's absolutely loss aversion. If I'm going to sit down with a client who's part of my practice, who's highly satisfied with my practice, at least we would hope that, right? We would expect that, right? And the experience is I want to raise my prices. The advisor at that moment, and as long as the relationship has been in existence, still feels this sense of tenuous connectivity to the client, that they imagine the client leaving because of the price increase. And by the way, in very rare circumstances, and if you add it all up, about 1 in 100 repricing exercises results in the client having a negative abreaction to the price increase and potentially saying, okay, I don't wish to stay here. But in all of those cases, if you debrief the advisors, and I have talked with dozens of advisors who've had that experience, it was a client that was very challenging to work with anyway. They weren't bonded to the advisor. But it's still the same experience for the advisor. I imagine going in and raising the price by what, 15, 20 basis points to get them in alignment with the standard in the practice. And you imagine the client says, how dare you? Why are you doing this? I'm mad as hell at you, and storming off. Loss aversion. I've just lost something. And by the way, that for the advisor, because clients are so difficult to acquire, whether it's a prospective client who's in process or an existing client who's in service, the experience of that person going away is a loss, and the advisor is stirred up by that loss. It's a incredibly powerful and incredibly painful and incredibly non-rational process inside the advisor that is you can recover from it, you can behave differently, but it's not easy. And the first step is to become aware of how powerful this is and how much it's about your beliefs and not about reality.
Well, so you've made them really aware of the challenge and how powerful this is. So let's spend a couple of minutes on what you can do about it, because it's not just awareness. It's not just knowing how hard this is. This is a threat to be bringing on new clients and hearing, yes, this is a threat to a client storming out of my office and leaving. What can an advisor who is also a fully functioning human being with system 1 and system 2 in place, what can they do about it?
Well, the starting point is what we just accomplished, to become aware that this is something that I am choosing, that is a process that's inside me, and that because I have discretion, I can decide to indulge it or I can decide to push against it. And that has to happen at a time outside of or separate from the moment of the pricing conversation or the moment of the repricing conversation. So the first step is for the advisor to go, okay, I have a problem. This is affecting my business. If I draw a line forward into the future, the negative loss relative to the positive gain is significant. If you think about repricing a practice in terms of prospects coming in and existing clients priced at a premium level, for many advisors, this is life-changing resourcefulness. So the first step is for the advisor to say, okay, I am causing this, I can change it. And the second step is to say, what would the delta be if I were to price appropriately? Okay, so that gives you your rootedness for yourself. Okay, I've got a problem. I feel the pain of my loss because of this. I've got to do something differently here. So it comes to a conclusion. The second step in that is then very powerful, is to establish a fee policy. And that policy becomes an external anchor to the conversation you have with client or with prospect. So it becomes a separate entity in the conversation, our practice policy. And so when it comes time to set price, you've established that price at a time when you're not talking to a client. And in that moment of setting the price, when you're not talking to the client, you can be rational about it and attach it to your business process. Our services merit this price and it costs us this much. So you can have a sense of belief in that price and the policy. Now, in the context of the moment of conversation with client or with prospect, you can appeal to the policy and say about the policy, this is our practice policy. And with the client, and so at that point, for your level of assets, given the services we're going to provide you, you can establish this policy and simply appeal to the policy. It's separate from you. And you can say, I'm obligated to follow this policy. You're obligated to follow this policy if you want to participate in our practice. Now, I would suggest strongly that you attach to that policy a very high experience quality to your intaking. So I would suggest expand the number of meetings and follow our guidance about creating experiences so the client's like, wow, this is really different. So that when you say this is our policy, it makes emotional sense to them. And when they say, well, that's your price, is there any flexibility there? You can say, that's the policy of the practice. We don't discount. We have a price integrity policy across all of our clients. We charge exactly the same for the services. There's no disparity. Now, I've seen a couple of advisors do something very interesting where they say, well, the only way we can discount is if I bring the proposal for the discount to the practice decision-making committee. So you detach the decision about the price and you appeal to a committee and you say, what I would have to do to discount you is bring a proposal to them for why we would discount these services. And so if you'd like, I mean, I could accept your request for a discount and why we should consider a discount. I can bring it to committee and see what they would say. I will tell you it's not likely, but there are times when we have seen the merit in that. Well, it's amazing. That puts the whole burden on the client to make the rationale, and they don't. They're like, okay, I understand this is the fee. If you've given the client a bunch of experiences, that will be the case. Now, with repricing, it's the same thing. You establish a fee, it's a policy, and now you can sit down with the client and say, look, we are going through the practice. We've resolved that we need to have an integrity about our pricing policy. And as we go through the practice and look at that, we see there's some clients that are slightly above and some clients that are slightly below. We're bringing everyone into alignment. And I'm having this conversation with you because we need to move your fee up to alignment with our pricing integrity policy. And that's going to happen over the course of the several months. Now, let me give you one last piece of advice around repricing. One of the most powerful things you can do in repricing is to introduce this idea to the client. Say, look, I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else but me, but we have this intentionality and policy about integrity across pricing. So we've gone through the business or practice and we're bringing everybody into alignment with that. Some people are going to have an increase in price. And the reason I wanted to talk with you is we are going to have to bring your fee up into alignment. You see, all this is we're going to have to, because the policy lurks out there as a separate entity. You say, we'll start that process in 3 months and we'll roll it in incrementally over 6. If there's a delay in the starting point, it's a dissociation. It derealizes the experience. The client's like, oh, not today, out in the future. Well, I have to imagine that future, and it detaches the heuristic response in the client. The point is, by changing the terms and making the policy of the price separate from your decision making, that you are accountable to it and the client's accountable to it, it's a triangle that you can talk about. You change the dynamic and you liberate yourself from having this conversation. Last word here, Scott. Every advisor who's done this process of repricing has the same experience, pricing and repricing. Once they've done it a few times and they have a new experience, reality shows them that all of their anxiety in the past was their own creation. And they do a few of these and the reality kicks in, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, reality looks different. And within 6 months, they don't even remember they had an issue with it. And so if we can accept this as something we need to change, if we can set up the policy that liberates us from the point of decision, and then we can get in the process and imagine ourselves 6 months from now feeling completely liberated, it's a very, very positive outcome for advisors, but also for clients.
Well, what a great place and what a great note on which to end this discussion. Ken, I really appreciate the exploration of what makes the advisor's role in pricing so incredibly difficult, really unpacking that and giving some, I think, very useful guidance on what the advisor can do. Hey, as our listeners return to their busy world of running their practices, let me remind all of you, we would love to hear your ideas for future topics. If you've got an idea, go to Ken's LinkedIn page or go to my LinkedIn page, Scott Tatum. Leave us an idea. If we use your idea on a future podcast, we'll be certain to give you a shout out. That's a wrap on this edition of Secrets of Successful Advisors with Ken Heyman, the podcast where we explore the science of clients, setting instincts aside so that insights can guide.